Well, as we've just been talking about Rishi Sunak, he is desperately trying to prove that it is not one rule for us and another rule for them, through his actions tonight. But according to a groundbreaking new poll from the Institute for Public Policy Research, UK voters no longer feel that democracy and the systems surrounding a democratically elected government serve their best interests. Not only this, but voters in the last general election, many of whom are probably listening to this right now, believe that it is party political donors and big business that drive the ideas behind public policy and not the MPs that we democratically elect. Just how worrying are these statistics, and do we need a better protected system or perhaps another system altogether to ensure that we are represented fairly by our elected officials? Joining me now is Harry Quilter-Pinner. Harry is Director of Research at the Institute for Public Policy Research and co-author of this report named The Road to Renewal. Hello, Harry.
Hi, Nick.
These are pretty alarming results. Just talk us through the headlines of what you found.
Yes. So what we've found is a significant drop in, first of all, kind of turnout and interest in democracy. So huge drops in voting in the UK and across the developed world, Western Europe and the US over the last 30 to 40 years. And at the same time, a dramatic rise in people rejecting kind of mainstream parties on both the right and the left in favour of populist alternatives. So in the UK, obviously, we've seen Nigel Farage and UKIP becoming much more popular, and the Brexit vote, of course, and obviously Donald Trump and in the US. And when we polled and spoke to citizens here in the UK, what comes through is a frustration at not being heard and listened to and not feeling like people have a voice and a say in democracy. So, for example, just one statistic for you, 4 in 5 people in Britain said that politicians poorly understand their lives at the moment.
Yeah, is it not a self-inflicted wound, though? Because if people don't go out to vote, which is what you're describing, then how can they expect a politician to be interested in their concerns?
Well, I think that the thing to say here is that people will only go out to vote if they feel that their voice counts. And what we find is that people increasingly feel that voters in a democracy are no longer the people who have the biggest say in how society's governed. So to give you one finding from the report, only 1 in 20 people said that voters had the most powerful influence on government policy decisions. But 1 in 2 people believe that the most powerful influence was, in fact, political donors, businesses, lobbying groups. So if people think that the system is rigged, then they are not going to turn out to vote. And the truth is, increasingly, over the last few decades, what we have seen is more and more power held centrally and held amongst a kind wealthy or a business lobby interest. So one of the findings of the report is that we need to try and rebalance that. We need to give people a voice and a say in democracy again, and we need to deal with things like the issue of big money in politics.
Yes, well, I'm not going to hold my breath on that one, but I'll just sort of repeat what I said before about it being a self-inflicted wound. I mean, you said people will only go out to vote if their vote counts, but their vote will only count if they go out to vote. I mean, people don't seem to be disconnected to politics these days. Is it more the case that they're interested in specific issues?
So I think just one point on your turnout to vote point, which is obviously we saw a massive increase in voting for the Brexit referendum and in the Scottish independence referendum. Turnout was a significant high. So I think when people know that their vote counts, when they think they're they're being given a meaningful choice about the future of their country, they do want to turn out, they do want to engage, but they don't want to do that if they feel that it's tokenistic, if it's not going to change their lives and impact them in the way that they want. What we have seen, and what you're pointing to there, Nick, is that large groups of people engaging in democracy in a different way. So, for example, street protests have actually increased in recent decades, as have things like petitions and other forms of engagement. But the truth is that our electoral system and our political party system that elects a government is still the way that most decisions are made. And so the call in this report is for politicians to undertake a kind of democratic renewal agenda that would re-engage people in the democratic process and give them a meaningful say in the decisions that shape their lives.
And now you keep referring to decades, that this is something that's been happening for decades. But the headline, which you've referred to already, is voters believe that their views are the main, whose views are the main influences behind government decisions. Most people said donors. Then they said corporations, newspaper owners, etc. Are you not describing the Conservative Party?
Well, I don't think we are. No, I think one of the main points in this work that we've done is to say that increasingly both of the mainstream political parties have failed to really respond to and engage in the kind of issues that people want them to, and the mainstream parties as a whole are being increasingly rejected by voters. And that's the same in the UK, but also across Europe. What we're finding is that alternative parties, sometimes on the left, mostly increasingly on the right in terms of right-wing populism, are getting increasing share of the vote. And that is a protest by voters saying, if those big parties, whether it's the Labour Party or the Conservative Party, if they don't want to represent us, if they can't represent us, we will find other people who will. Now, there's challenges. There's some of those alternatives are deeply worrying for the future of liberal democracy. And so we really need those mainstream parties to perform the function that they have through quite a lot of history, particularly people like the Labour Party, who used to be the voice of working people in this country, and who can once again represent people in the way that people really feel that they want to be represented.
Well, you say that these fringe groups, and particularly the right-wing ones, are a threat to the future of democracy. But the Conservative Party seems to, at the moment, be trying to unpick democracy in this country by insisting on ID checks. Is the most visible of those moves.
I think what we've seen is obviously the Brexit vote. There was a kind of famous take back control saying. And I think people wanted a sense that they were going to have more control over their lives again, and that this would lead to them feeling more power and control. And I think the worrying thing that we've seen since then is that, and we point to this in the report, there have been occasions when the government have in fact centralised power more, thinking here of things like proroguing of Parliament and the kind of engagement in things like the courts in this country. So certainly the report calls for both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party to devolve more power to local communities, to people, and to tackle entrenched kind of moneyed interest, the kind of power of donors and other kind of corporate interests in democracy. So certainly we would say that at the moment the government hasn't got it right. They haven't. They're not giving back control in the way that the Brexit referendum promised.
Well, we'll add it to the long list of things that were promised for Brexit that turned out to be a fantasy. But, I mean, you describe it as a sort of a breakdown for the major political parties. But is it not, I mean, concentrating on the Tories, because they have, after all, been in power for 12 years, is it not working actually really well for them? People's, particularly young people's, disinterest in voting is doing just fine for the Tories, because they rely on the old anyway.
Well, certainly, the demographic which the Conservatives have won most support in recent decades is older voters, and older voters are more likely to turn out. And so in that sense, perhaps disengagement of younger voters is in the short-term electoral interest of the party, maybe. But I think what we're seeing is increased voter volatility. What that means is that instead of consistently voting for one party election on election, as has happened for large swathes of the population for most of the history of the UK, what we're seeing is voters increasingly changing their minds quite dramatically between parties at each election. So whilst the Conservative Party has benefited from the 2019 swing, for example, I think one of the things that both political parties need to be aware of is that they can no longer rely on groups of voters to continue supporting them no matter what. Voters will shift, and that means they have to win those votes, and that means responding to the things that really matter to people and communities up and down the country.
What do you make of what the Conservatives said was a cynical move, but others might think is actually really where we need to be run by a coalition? The Liberals and Labour are considering some sort of electoral pact. What do you think about that?
I mean, I think obviously at the moment that's complete conjecture, and I have to say that the history of kind of electoral pacts delivering and voters responding to them positively is not great. So I would be surprised if there was a formal electoral pact indeed. But I think one of the findings that consistently comes out when we speak to voters is that they want parties and politicians to work together in the interests of the country. And I think that a less polarised, a less combative politics in this country that took seriously the really big issues that we face, whether that's, living standards and the cost of living crunch that we're facing at the moment, or whether it's climate change and the climate crisis, I think would go down very well with voters. So I think a kind of more collegiate party politics would probably be a good thing for the UK in the long term.
But again, it very much depends on people bothering to go out and vote. And the amount of times I've heard people call me and say, I don't vote, they're all the same. I mean, it's just absolutely... It makes me want to bash my head on the table, because of course they're not all the same, but the result will be the same if a significant number of mostly young people feel that the system doesn't represent them. But again, the system doesn't represent them because they don't go out and vote.
Well, I think it's incumbent on our leaders to change that. So we did... Do
you think? Isn't it incumbent on the young people to actually bother to leave the house?
I think it's down to both, and we need to do both. I mean, for example, one of the things that I think we should be doing is we should be, what you're talking about there is a culture of voting. If you go back to my grandparents' generation, it was a duty, a social responsibility to vote, which I think is what you're kind of suggesting has broken down. And I think we need to create that kind of culture once again. And so one of the things, we don't make this recommendation in the report, but we've talked about it at IPPR previously, which is, why do we not do much more democratic education in schools so that young people understand the benefits of voting and the history of democracy and the role that they can play in it. When we engage with young people, and we did a session with young people on engagement in voting up in Yorkshire a few months ago, and the dynamism, the interest, the passion for the future of this country and for some of the really big issues like climate change was absolutely palpable. So I think if politicians can reach out a hand and we can create a culture of voting once again. But I think it's going to have to take both young people engaging and political parties and political operators reaching out and kind of making that happen.
Oh, just finally, I mean, are you actually concerned about the future of democracy in this country?
Look, I don't think that we are heading for a kind of Russian style kind of scenario in the UK. I think that there's a lot of scaremongering in the press often about the end of democracy. I don't think that's what we are facing at the moment. But I think what we are experiencing instead is what I would call a kind of slow decline, as some of the institutions that have our democratic institutions that have shaped our society over the last 100 years are kind of in decline. And what we need is renewal. We need to reinvest in those democratic institutions so that they work for people and they work for the 21st century. And one of the things we say in the report really clearly is that leaders like Boris Johnson and Joe Biden, President Biden, have held up the kind of war in Ukraine as a fight for liberal democracy. And clearly we need to win that fight in Ukraine for the Ukrainian people, or help the Ukrainians win that fight. But we also need to win it at home.
All right, thanks for that. That's Harry Quilter-Pinner, Director of Research at the Institute for Public Policy Research and co-author of the report that we've just been talking about, called The Road to Renewal. So what do you think about the sort of lack of engagement? I mean, there is a lot of that about, isn't there? People do seem to be gripped with the notion that all political parties are the same. Nothing will ever change. What's the point in voting? The amount of times I've heard that kind of thing are just numerous. Is the lack of engagement the fault of the political parties, or, understandably, I suppose, I mean, I'm not excusing it, but it might be understandable that political parties are only interested in the interests of those that vote for them. So if you don't vote, you get nothing. So this might not come as news to you, but to see it written down is quite alarming. There is a dramatic loss of faith in the ability of British democracy to serve the interests of UK voters. This is what a new report that we were just talking about reveals. It finds that donors to political parties and big businesses are now commonly viewed by the electorate as the main drivers of government policy. Now, I would suggest that might have something to do with the fact that we have been led in this country by the Conservative Party for the last 12 years. Disturbing evidence that millions of voters feel their voices and views go largely unheard while big money interests hold most sway has been uncovered by the Institute for Public Policy Research, the Electoral Reform Society and the organisation Unlock Democracy. They polled 3,442 adults, which is a decent enough survey. 6% of voters in elections in Great Britain believe their views are the main influences behind eventual decisions. 6%. 4 times that many believe that major donors to political parties have the most influence over shaping policy. Wow. 0345 6060 973. So, is it the political party's fault? Or is it our fault for not voting in the numbers that we used to? Because there is a significant decrease in, even if you just go back to the 20 noughties and the 2010s, I mean, it was above 60%. The EU referendum was a 72% turnout. But we've been in the 60s, 60%, there or thereabouts, for a good long while now. And it's, by a large margin, it's old people that will go out in any weather to vote. You can't stop them. Young people, on the other hand, more and more, they just think, I can't be bothered. They're all the same. Nothing ever changes. I put the blame at them, personally, because if they did go out and vote, then political parties might be more interested in, serving their needs. But maybe you have another idea. 0345 6060 973. Maidenhead, hello, Paul.
Hello, Nick. How you doing?
Good, thanks.
I've got a theory. Why can't we have proportional representation? Because the reason why I live in the Thames Valley, I've been voting for 20 years, and I'm sort of more on the left liberal side. But there's no point in voting around where I live because it's all Conservative, and my vote just basically goes in the bin. So if there's PR, if there's proportional representation, I think more people would get out and vote because they will know that their vote counts more, rather than, I've got this kind of political way of thinking, but I live in this area, so the vote's always going to go in the bin, isn't it? So we need proportional representation.
I couldn't agree more. And if Labour and the Lib Dems ever get into power, that should be the first thing that they do.
Yeah, defo.
Although I do believe that the left have a history of shooting themselves in the foot, and that's probably what they will not do. Leaving the goal open for the Conservatives to storm back in the very next time. Yeah, I just don't think they're smart enough to do that. But I guess we'll find out. Thanks, Paul. 0345 6060 973. Ashford. Hello, Lenny.
Good evening, Nick.
Lenny.
Well, I have not voted from 210.
Right.
And I was always a Conservative. Now, I try to be an honourable person, and my vote means something to me, and I will not put my cross next to anyone I've got no confidence in.
Right.
So I have not voted pure principle that I will not put my cross next to someone I've got any faith in, just for the sake of voting, so I don't vote.
But let me ask you this about that. How much research into all of the different parties do you actually do, or do you just get a feeling?
No, I started taking an interest in politics in 210, and I try to, because I've got my health is not the best that I would like. I'm restricted, so to keep on things that I can do.
Yeah.
So what I do is, I to keep my brain occupied, I now take a very big interest in politics.
Okay. So you do actually inform yourself about the positions of each leader of each party and what they're offering the electorate?
Yeah. Now, can I give you a couple of examples, please, Nick?
Yeah, go on.
Well, I truly believe that the dispatch box is not fit for purpose. And the House is the Speaker of the House of Commons is not fit for purpose.
Yeah.
Because at the dispatch box, that is where I understand, as a layman in my way, that is where an MP is held to account. That's where they should speak the truth.
Yes.
And it doesn't happen. And that is the home of our democracy. Now, the bit that absolutely I cannot, no one can explain this to me. There can be someone lying at the dispatch box, an opposition MP tells him he's lying, and the opposition MP is telling the truth. He gets thrown out the chamber, and the one who's lying is allowed to stay.
Yes, that is a pretty accurate description of what happens on virtually a daily basis that the House is sitting. Yeah,
that is it. And my definition of an MP is a honourable person that they all talk about honour, but they lie.
Yeah, so it's a dishonourable, supposedly honourable person.
Yeah, they're not all the same. I do understand there are some good MPs. You mustn't tar all of them with the same brush.
That's right. But let me ask you this, Lenny. I mean, is it not possible? Okay, so you haven't found the perfect candidate in 10 years, but could you not just vote for somebody who is the least worst?
No, because if there is something about them that I do not like, I mean, then I will not put my cross next to their name.
So you're after perfection?
No, not perfection, but what it is, it's confidence.
Right. Okay, and you haven't found it lately. I completely understand. Thanks, Lenny. 0345 6060 973. I will take more calls about this But just after the news, we're going to cross over to America. Dave Ross, the presenter on Cairo Radio in Seattle, is going to join me to discuss the latest news coming out of the United States. We'll talk about Donald Trump Jr.'s texts immediately after the 2020 election, how Donald Trump Sr.'s new social media network is going, and a guilty plea in the latest development on the US Capitol raid. All that's coming up. It's 12:30 on LBC, the news headlines with Andy Ivey. Right, off across to America now. Joining me now to discuss the latest news on the other side of the Atlantic, Dave Ross, presenter for Cairo 97.3 in Seattle. Very good to talk to you again, Dave.
Good morning, Nick.
How are you doing?
Good, thank you.
Well, now it's Trump. The peach powder puff president is never off the front pages. The screaming Mimi has done it again. Let's talk about Trump Jr. to start with. He appears to have been caught out with some texts that have just become evident. One legal authority is calling it a smoking rifle. He has appeared to have been instrumental in trying to overturn the result of the last election.
Well, there are a lot of people who had a hand in trying to do that, but what's happened is that apparently the committee that is examining the rebellion got access to some of Donald Trump Jr.'s texts with the White House Chief of Staff at the time, Mark Meadows. And apparently they were talking about various tactics that they were going to use to overturn the results of the election. The problem here is not so much that Donald Trump and his family is somehow innocent. And, of course, it's proving that there is some direct connection between what happened and the president. And for these texts to have been sent out by his son, his oldest son, seems to be a pretty direct connection to the president. So what they have to do then is determine whether Donald Trump himself ordered those texts sent or whether Don Jr. took it upon himself to send those texts. What they've got to do is prove that if they're going to indict Trump, they have to prove that he intended to do something corrupt, something that he knew was wrong. And one of the defenses is going to be that Trump himself genuinely believed in his heart and was told by his attorneys that he'd won. Now, if he genuinely believes he won and was being told that by his attorneys, there's a chance he could skate on this. So that's the line that the committee is trying to walk here.
Right, and some of the tactics that were suggested in these texts by Trump Jr. are really quite astonishing. They included lawsuits in swing states, the overwhelming majority of which were rejected, having a handful of Republican state houses put forward slates of fake Trump electors. CNN also said Trump Jr. suggested that if such measures didn't work, lawmakers in Congress should just dismiss the electoral results and vote to keep Trump in office. It's like a coup.
Well, see, the problem is we have a really screwed up way of electing presidents because the founders didn't trust direct election by the people. They thought that if they allowed people to directly elect the president, some wacko might get in office, right?
Imagine.
So they said I know. So they decided that an electoral Congress, a group of wise people, would sit together and they would cast the actual votes. So, of course, the way it's come down to is now those electors are supposed to simply vote as the majority in each of the states did. But there is that weak point in the system because that's the official way that the president is elected. And so you had these fake electors who are officials of the Republican Party in these states using their official state seals to certify a false result, to certify that Trump had won in their state when in fact he didn't. And we're going to present those documents to Mike Pence. And Mike Pence, to his credit, I mean, it was a pretty close call, but he said, no, I'm not going to throw out the results. Now, I have no idea what might have happened if he had done that. That really put us on the brink of chaos.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of pressure, of course, now to change this law so that is, in fact, a formality. Nothing like this can happen again. But that appears to have been the plan. But again, this is the things you have to remember. The Constitution lays this out. And the House of Representatives, if there is any confusion in the Senate on counting the electors, under the Constitution, the House of Representatives is empowered to choose the next president. So their strategy was to throw the Senate into confusion so that they couldn't reach a decision, and then the House would, under the Constitution, take over. Yeah. So I lay all that out to say that since that's in the Constitution, again, this is going to be Trump's defense. We were just raising objections, and then the Constitution lays out what happens when you raise objections, and so this was all a legal attempt to overthrow the result.
Right. Now, and the Republicans, they're so smart. What they've been doing ever since is making sure that they never fail at doing this again, because they have been they play the long game, don't they? They get local judges. Like small town judges that will make decisions based on what happens in their tiny area, and if you get enough of them, you blanket the country with thousands of these people, then they would be more likely to act in your interest. They've also you can also elect your election. I can't remember.
Secretaries of State.
Right, and they're the ones that announce who won the vote. So. They really are. They're making it such that this can't happen next time around. They will definitely win.
Well, I hope you're wrong there. There should be enough people on the staffs of these various states who are trained to be honest accountants that couldn't happen. I mean, the problem has been
Fingers
for the Republicans.
Crossed.
Yeah, I know. Well, they don't trust voting by mail. There's this idea that because a lot of here in Washington State, for example, we don't go to the polls anymore. All our ballots are mailed in,
right?
And each ballot has a barcode, right? So I'm a registered voter. I had to, get my ID and the whole thing, and so I get a ballot with my name on it. And it's got a specific barcode. Now, conceivably, somebody who wanted to say stuff the ballot box with phony ballots would have to get a ballot and duplicate them. But the moment you saw a ballot with a duplicate barcode, right, that was fraudulent, and the machines would kick it out.
Right.
So what I'm saying is there are checks and balances to make sure that the votes are accurate. You would have to have a Secretary of State, and that's the chief election officer in each state, who is just willing to outright lie, which I think would be risking a jail term, to overturn an election that somebody else had won. So I'm hoping that we have enough safeguards in place that can't happen.
Okay. Best of luck with that.
You don't seem convinced. Maybe we'll have to have the UN send observers.
Yeah, exactly. Talking of jail, they've put in jail one of these far-right Proud Boys, one of these dinglings, the yeehaws that sort of led the assault on the Capitol building. He might face up to 28 years in prison, but he's apparently cooperating, which might mean that 100 other of these Proud Boys might also go to jail. What's happening there?
Yeah, well, we're talking about Charles Donahue. He's 34 years old. He pleaded guilty to charges of conspiring to obstruct an official proceeding and assaulting Capitol Police. And he's a member of the Proud Boys. It's kind of a nebulous club, but as far as I can tell, it was founded to be a club for men who love America, but they hate political correctness, and they, of course, don't want any women in their club. They're also anti-white guilt, and their meetings would consist of drinking and fighting. This is according to the founder, who has since left the group. These guys, the one good thing about this, and this hasn't gotten much play, they deliberately did not bring any guns to the rebellion because the D.C. police had said they were going to be checking people for guns at the checkpoint. So as far as we know, they were not armed, but they definitely did get involved in fighting. And so if this guy is going to testify as to, what they knew and what their plans were, that's good. But these guys are the small fry. I think what most Americans want to find out is who actually gave them the order to assault the Capitol, how much planning was there, and if they had succeeded, would they have gone back? Because they had hidden weapons. They didn't have weapons on them on the Capitol grounds, but they had a stash of weapons at apparently various hotels around D.C. The question then was, what were they going to do next? And that's the really scary part here. So we all hope that they get to the bottom of that. Because, as you know, guns are amazingly easy to get in this country. And the idea that thousands of people that were part of an organization had created a cache of weapons, which they were going to use who knows how, is, I find personally very frightening.
Well, quite. Let's change the subject just a bit. Have you been on Truth Social, Donald Trump's social media platform?
I have not, and neither has Trump, except for one post.
Yes.
And apparently it's having trouble. I was reading some of the statistics, and Twitter gets an average, just for comparison, of 217 million visitors a day. At last check, Truth Social was getting 200,000 a day, a tiny, tiny fraction of that. And many of their officers have apparently quit. And like I say, I think Trump has put up one post but has since ignored it. So it doesn't appear to be the social media juggernaut he was hoping for.
Yeah, that really is extraordinary. Just that specific statistic of the posts by Donald Trump himself. It's his own social media platform, and he's only bothered to put one post up there. What did it say? Can you remember?
I do not remember. What I know that the fatal flaw with Truth Social is that one of the most entertaining thing, what makes it fun to be a Trumper, is to be able to own the libs. You're familiar with that expression?
Yes.
You post something that completely humiliates the liberals on the platform. Well, Truth Social was meant to exclude anybody who wasn't a Trump fan. So, you're in an echo chamber and you got nobody to own. To own the libs, there have to be libs to own.
Right.
And since they set up Truth Social just for the MAGA, the Make America Great Again crowd, apparently it just was too boring to succeed.
Yeah, where's the fun in that? Well, it does. If Truth Social actually folds, then it does join a long list of Trump business.
Yes.
Should we call them failures? Why not? Trump Airlines,
yes.
Trump Water,
University, right? Trump Steaks,
Trump the board game, Trump casinos, Trump magazine, Trump mortgage, Trump travel, Trump vodka, Trump cologne, Trump menswear, and Trump mattresses. I think the only thing that he has achieved a great success in is to persuade people that he's a great success.
Yes. Well, now you're piling on, Nick. But, I mean, give the guy some credit. Apparently, with all those failures, he's still a billionaire, although we still haven't seen his taxes. The taxes he promised to release once the longest audit in American history was finally over, which I guess it's not. So who knows? He still seems to live quite well, and he has quite a fat campaign war chest, which he is only spending on very select candidates like Dr. Oz, apparently.
I think if he was a billionaire, and I'm sorry if this sounds cynical, he would have put his taxes in a full-page advert in every newspaper in the land.
Well, maybe he just doesn't want to brag. He was always saying, I don't want to be braggadocious.
Yeah.
So I think maybe he's discovered his modest streak now.
Right. Okay, that's a good one to end on there. Thanks, Dave. Dave Ross.
You bet, Nick. Thank
presenter
you.
for KIRO, Cairo 97.3 in Seattle. Right, back to your calls after this break about the collapse of faith in democracy in this country. And in America too, I guess. It seems to be something that's affecting the whole of the West. People just don't feel that political parties represent their interests anymore. They think that that political parties base their policies on whoever gives them the most money. Yes, we're talking about what seems to be a dramatic loss of faith in the ability of British democracy to serve the interests of us all. A study entitled Road to Renewal draws on polling of 3,400-odd adults and found that just 6% of voters in elections in this country believe that their views are the main influences behind eventual decisions. In other words, we just think that they completely ignore us, political parties, when they get into power and base their policies entirely on the interests of those that have donated money to that party. Wow, I thought I was cynical. 0345 6060 973. Greenwich, Laurie.
Oh, hi there, Nick.
Hey, Laurie.
Yeah, great show as always.
Thanks.
I'm just calling about, what the discussion you're having tonight, and it's quite intriguing. I just wanted to talk about proportional representation, which is something that I've backed for many, many years. Seeing how it's worked in places like Germany and the Netherlands. Obviously, no system is perfect. Obviously, I grant that. But I just wonder if the British public now would consider it if Labour Party would be sort of brave enough to back it. I just wanted to get your view on that.
We have to. In fact, it's difficult to find another major economy that is not run by a coalition. Why people are frightened about that in this country, I don't know. I mean, a rainbow coalition of interested parties who would represent the majority of the people among the coalition just seems like a much better idea than yet another minority government that can rule like an emperor because their minority vote has given them the majority of the seats. Our system is crazy.
Yeah, well, if I remember, going back a couple of decades, the argument used to be that it will allow fringe sort of loony parties to have a say in the system, which I think is now discredited. So I think that they really need to look at that. But also, I'm sure I read about 2 months ago that in the last Labour Party conference, they actually had a motion on it, and it was voted down. And I'm not sure if it was by the unions.
Typical.
But if that is the case, then that is very, very disappointing, because I am sure that Tony Blair did offer something to Paddy Ashdown back in the late 90s about that. But Labour won by such a whopping majority, it went off everyone's radar. But, that's the other point to make, that in Germany, in the recent past, the Green Party has had much more of a bigger say than you would expect, precisely because of proportional representation.
Right.
And they could get much more foothold in politics.
Yes, the Greens are doing considerably better now than they traditionally have been, because people are, their interest in green issues has been revivified, and so the fact that they get nothing from 4 to 8%, I think they're polling around about now. That they will get nothing last time, they'll get nothing next time, they'll never get anything, does rather inform why particularly young people find it a bit disinteresting, because that is probably the issue that they've shown most interest in, green issues, ecological issues, the future of the planet and so on, whereas the other major parties are, by comparison, relatively disinterested because the people that vote for them haven't expressed that interest, mostly older people. Thanks, Laurie. 0345 6060 973. Helen tweets, the most interesting part of the report is that distrust in government has diminished in all age groups and from left and right. That is correct. Yeah. The public's verdict on politicians' ability to comprehend their lives is damning. Asked how well they believed politicians understood the lives of people like you, 78% said badly. Amazing. Do politicians understand people like you, was the question. 78% said no. Just 1% said yes, they do, and very well. Something seriously broken. 0345 6060 973. East Yorkshire. Hello, Mike.
Hi, Nick. What prompted my call was when you were saying about Labour and Liberals cooperating at an election. And with the French election being on, I saw what was happening over there. 12 candidates today to have a vote, and then the two have a shootout in a fortnight.
Yeah.
And I thought, that sounds good. So what I did, and I'm a bit sad, but what I did was look at the last election, the 2019 election, and the Tory party won about 390 seats. So what I did was look up by adding the second, third and fourth candidates' votes together to see whether, if you did add those three together, it would beat the guy who won.
Right, and these are Labour, Lib Dem and Greens?
Usually, yes. That was the case. Obviously, you've got Monster Raving, Looney, Brexit and the rest of them.
Yeah.
But if you took second, third and fourth, added those votes together against the guy who won 390 Conservative seats, how many would they have lost, do you think, if you added second, third and fourth together?
Well, this is a test now. I'll say 100.
1.
Oh.
Ashton underline. Which tells you that if the Labour Party and the Liberal Party are going to do any good, cooperating isn't the answer. They've got to convince Tory voters to vote Labour or Liberal.
Right.
Literally, it amazed me because I thought, when I did it, I thought, this will be great. I'll ring Nick up and say, do you realise Labour would have had a 30-seat majority if you worked on that principle? And I was stunned. There was only 1 out of 390 would have made a difference.
Right.
So they've got to convince, they've got to take the public with them.
Yeah.
And I know the public don't believe in what the politicians are saying at the minute, so that's going to be hard.
But talk me through, just so I'm clear, what you did was take each individual seat.
Yeah.
Wow, that must have taken ages.
Not really, no, because Wikipedia, I went on Wikipedia and looked at 2019 election results by constituency.
Right.
And it lists it, total vote, percentage of vote.
Yeah.
So
But I would have to say, though, I mean, what we already discussed is proportional representation. That would take care of that issue because you wouldn't be talking about individual seats. You'd be talking about the whole country's vote. And so,
absolutely, absolutely, and I didn't go through Labour seats, but what I found was it was quite interesting when you looked at it a bit. What you would get in closed seats, because there are closed seats, say Tory 30, Labour 29, the next one would be 500. So even when you added the 500 to the 29, it didn't get you, and the next one would be 500, 10 and 5.
Right. I'll admit I'm getting a bit lost, Mike, but in all, it would be solved, or rather the majority of the people would have at least some representation in Parliament if proportional representation was the system that we worked on, and it wouldn't be this sort of first past the post when a party that gets a minority of the vote, you didn't get over 50%, have as was famously described, a stonking majority of the seats. I mean, that's obviously a broken system, but it favours the party that is in control at the moment, so they're certainly not going to change it. And if the Labour Party ever win another election, they'll probably be so giddy with delight that they won't change the system either. So I guess we're stuck with it. Thanks for that, Mike. See if I can squeeze one more in. Kent, hello, Robert.
Yeah, hi. First off, I'd like to say Winston Churchill once said, democracy isn't the best, but it's the best we deserve. So I find that quite funny. But I do believe governments
Oh, Struth, another mobile phone call that just disappears before my very eyes like a cloud of steam. It just goes. One day, some manufacturer will make a mobile phone that you can actually use as a phone. We're still waiting. Better luck next time, Robert. I'm afraid that we've run out of time.